When we talk about disputes between lessors and lessees, after rent disagreements, insurance disputes may be the number 2 area of disagreement. In this webinar, we will drill down into lessees' 4 insurance requirements in the AIR CRE lease, including the critical additional insured endorsement. And what if lessee fails to comply? We will discuss 2 major points of leverage for lessors under the AIR CRE lease. And the topics for today, this is the roadmap. Topic number 1, general liability insurance and the key endorsement on lessee's general liability insurance. Topic 2, the other insurance coverages lessee is required to obtain. Topic 3 will be the scenario where lessee is not complying with its obligations. We'll discuss a lessor enforcement right, which is a rent increase. And then topic 4, the second enforcement right we will discuss, if lessee fails to comply with its insurance requirements, termination of the lease. Topic 1, general liability insurance and the key endorsement. So paragraph 8 of the AIR CRE lease discusses lessee's insurance requirements. And 8.2a in particular is the liability insurance carried by lessee. So this is how it appears in the AIR CRE lease generally. And now let's zoom in on 8.2a. This sets forth lessee's general liability insurance requirement. It states, lessee shall obtain and keep in force a commercial general liability policy of insurance protecting lessee and lessor as an additional insured against claims for bodily injury, personal injury, and property damage based upon or arising out of the ownership, use, occupancy, or maintenance of the premises and all pertinent areas thereto. So this is the most important insurance typically that the lessee is required to obtain. Most important insurance for lessee and the most important insurance for lessor. And as you can see, it requires lessee to add lessor as an additional insured. And the way you want to think about this is this secures lessee's indemnity obligation. So paragraph 8.7 of the lease provides that lessee indemnifies lessor in connection with claims that arise relating to its use of the premises. So lessee has that indemnity obligation in 8.7. But how is that obligation secured? It's secured through lessee obtaining insurance. And the way you can conceptualize this is almost like a security deposit. Just like a security deposit that lessee provides to lessor, it protects lessor against a scenario where lessee doesn't pay its rent, for example. This is similar in the sense that if lessee has this indemnity obligation, and this is the security, this is the backup, this is the teeth for that obligation. And the amount of the insurance that lessee is required to obtain is $1 million per occurrence with an annual aggregate of not less than $2 million. So that's the coverage limit. And then let's focus on this third highlight, because this is important. Lessee is also required to obtain an endorsement at least as broad as the insurance service organization's additional insured managers or lessors of premises endorsement. This is a key endorsement because if there is a claim by a third party, a lawsuit is brought against lessee and lessor, let's say a slip and fall situation, and the person who's injured sues both lessee and lessor. This additional insured requirement provides that the insurance company, if everything is done properly, will not only indemnify lessor against any damages it suffers from this lawsuit, but that it will defend lessor. It will hire counsel to defend lessor. I'm going to give you all a pop quiz. I like to do that. And you can answer in the chat box if you'd like. Is a certificate of insurance sufficient? Is it enough? Because we've seen those one-page certificates of insurance. Is it enough for lessee to provide to lessor that one-page certificate of insurance, which in the bottom left states that lessor is an additional insured? And I see a no. Yep, that's correct. It's not enough. A couple of no's, yep. The reason it's not enough is because that insurance certificate is not completed by the insurance company. It's completed by the insurance broker. And depending on the insurance broker, some are very lax. It may not be correct. And so the best thing to do is for the lessor to actually require, with the delivery of that insurance certificate, if you're accepting an insurance certificate, that you require the endorsement to be attached. And this is the title of the endorsement. It's here at the bottom. The title of the endorsement is just there. Additional Insured Managers or Lessors of Premises Endorsement. It's a standard endorsement, and that should be provided by the lessee and the lessee's insurance broker with the certificate of insurance. And if that's all done right, in that scenario where there is a slip in, there is some type of liquid in a warehouse, lessee's warehouse that it's leasing, and a person slips and falls and is injured, and a lawsuit is brought, in that scenario, if the additional insured requirements are satisfied by lessee, the insurance company should step up and defend and indemnify lessor. So that is topic number 1, and I will be staying. We have 3 more topics, and if you could save any questions for the Q&A, we're going to do a 20-minute Q&A afterward. Topic 2 is other insurance coverages required. So lessee is also required to obtain 3 other types of insurance under the AIR CRE lease, and those are set forth in 8.4, which generally looks like this on the AIR CRE lease. And when we zoom in, they're described here. So the first, under 8.4a, is property damage insurance. Lessee shall obtain and maintain insurance coverage on all of lessee's personal property, trade fixtures, and lessee-owned alterations and utility installations. So that's the property damage insurance. The second additional insurance requirement is business interruption insurance in 8.4b. This came up a lot during COVID, and many people learned that there are significant limits to this type of coverage, which we won't get into. That's beyond the scope of this. 8.4c is workers' compensation insurance. So in addition to that general liability insurance we discussed in the first topic, these are the 3 additional insurance requirements for the lessee under the AIR CRE lease. Topic number 3, we're getting into enforcement rights. And in a scenario where lessee does not provide the required insurance under the lease, in a situation where lessee does not provide the required insurance under the lease, we're going to discuss lessor enforcement right number 1, which is a rent increase. And this is provided for in paragraph 8.9 of the AIR CRE lease, which looks something like this on the document. And when we zoom in, it's here. 8.9, lessee acknowledges that any failure on its part to obtain or maintain the insurance required herein will expose lessor to risks and potentially cause lessor to incur costs not contemplated by this lease. Accordingly, for any month or portion thereof that lessee does not maintain the required insurance and or does not provide lessor with the required binders or certificates evidencing the existence of the required insurance. So then here it is, the remedy, the base rent shall automatically be increased without any requirement for notice to lessee by an amount equal to 10% of the then existing base rent or $100, whichever is greater. So in a scenario where lessee does not have the required insurance, for that period of time, lessor can charge 10% of the then existing base rent. The base rent automatically increases by 10%. Now, what about a scenario where lessee does have the required insurance, but it hasn't provided evidence to lessor that it has the required insurance? Maybe lessor has asked lessee, we don't have, all your insurance, maybe the additional insured endorsement hasn't been provided. Let's say lessee did have the insurance in place, including the additional insured endorsement, but it hasn't provided it to lessor. And for whatever reason, it refuses to for some period of time. Under this provision, it says, for any month or portion thereof, that lessee does not provide lessor with the required binders or certificates evidencing the existence of the required insurance, the base rent increases by 10%. So this remedy is available under the terms of 8.9 in a scenario where lessee actually has the insurance in place, but does not provide evidence to lessor. And now we'll move to topic number 4, which is the second enforcement right. When lessee doesn't comply with the insurance requirements under the lease, the second lessor enforcement right is termination. This is the default breach and remedies section of the AIR CRE lease, the beginning of it. And now we'll zoom in. 13.1b provides that a lessee has committed a breach if, under 13.1b, the following occurs: the failure of lessee to provide reasonable evidence of insurance, where such failure continues for a period of 3 business days following written notice to lessee. So lessor believes there's some deficiency in the insurance, and it gives formal written notice to lessee. This is the deficiency. You have 3 business days to cure. If lessee does not cure within those 3 business days, then lessor has the remedies available for a breach under paragraph 13.2. And it's here on the screen. In the event of a breach, lessor may, with or without further notice or demand, and without limiting lessor in the exercise of any right or remedy which lessor may have by reason of such breach, it can, under A, terminate lessee's right to possession of the premises by any lawful means, in which case this lease shall terminate and lessee shall immediately surrender possession to lessor. So that seems like a pretty tough remedy, and it is. And there's only a 3 business day period for the lessee to cure. And that 3 business day period is the same for non-payment of rent. There are other defaults by lessee under the AIR CRE lease, which allow lessee more than 3 business days to cure, substantially more than 3 business days to cure. But this is an indication of the significance, the seriousness to lessor in the event lessee fails to provide its insurance. It rises to that level 3 business days, which is equivalent to non-payment of rent. And this is consistent, the AIR CRE lease is consistent with other commercial leases. Most commercial leases will have a short period for compliance with respect to an insurance deficiency. So I will leave it there and make a couple of disclaimers that I sometimes make at the beginning of these seminars. AIR Forms Practitioner is not affiliated with or sponsored by AIR CRE. I'm not providing legal advice, insurance advice during this webinar. It's for education and discussion purposes only. And for a bit of additional background on me, as many of you know, I'm the managing partner of Consensus Legal. Consensus Legal specializes in commercial sales, leasing, and financing transactions. And, many of you use the AIR CRE contracts. These are the best contracts, commercial real estate contracts on the market, in my opinion. So with those comments, the presentation portion of the webinar is completed, and I can answer your questions. David asks, under 8.2b, is it required to obtain that it requires an endorsement, correct? Yes, an endorsement is required. That additional insured endorsement set forth in 8.4 is required. Does the address of the property need to be on the certificate? On the endorsement, it will not be provided on the certificate, on the endorsement. On the certificate, the insurance policy that lessee obtains needs to cover the premises that is the subject of the lease. So ideally, the address, any confirmation you can get that the premises is included within lessee's general liability policy, including the address of the property, that's a good thing. Absolutely. Jen answered the question correctly. Certificate, the insurance certificate is not a binding agreement. That's right. Edie asks, notification methods. Will we discuss breaches under the lease, how lessee is supposed to be notified of the breach pursuant to the AIR CRE lease? That's outside the scope of this webinar, but I will say this. If lessor is pursuing an unlawful detainer and termination of the lease, 100% you need to consult with counsel. That is a very technical enforcement remedy, and you don't want to do that improperly. But discussing getting into breaches and enforcement methods, that's a little beyond the scope here. Matt asks, how should we approach a situation where a tenant's premises is covered under a master insurance policy that also covers multiple other sites? How do we verify the coverage is sufficient? That is a great question. Many of these technical insurance issues, us real estate lawyers, we typically defer to the lessor's insurance broker on things like that. And that's pretty technical. So I'll have to defer, and I would recommend in that scenario that you you talk with your insurance broker about those technical issues or your risk management. Douglas asks, what if the cost of insurance is greater than a 10% increase in rent allowed per 8.9? What recourse is available to lessor? That is a good question, and I am going to pull up the lease. There are situations where if a lessee fails to perform an obligation, lessor can perform the obligation on lessee's behalf and charge 115% of the cost. That is typically for failure to repair. So yeah, there is a risk to lessor here. It doesn't necessarily fully compensate lessor for that risk. There are other remedies that lessor can utilize. Other amounts. When a lease is terminated, there's a whole host of remedies. And when there's a breach, there's a whole host of remedies. We discussed two of them, but there's a lot of ways to put pressure on the lessee. General liability insurance, lessor has a general liability insurance policy. And lessor is required to maintain it. And just as a matter of practice, lessors maintain a general liability insurance policy. So now that is supposed to be excess. Lessees is supposed to be primary, and lessors kind of kicks in as a stopgap. So that stopgap of lessor having its general liability insurance policy, hopefully it would provide protection in a scenario where lessee didn't have general liability insurance for a period of time. Hopefully that somewhat addresses your question, Douglas. Ken asks, in real practice, will a court give a tenant more than 3 days time to cure or get insurance? That's a very good question. You're talking about the paper says what it says. The lease says what it says. In actuality, Ken asks, can a lessor evict a lessee? Can it terminate the lease and evict a lessee for this insurance issue? So I will say this. The typical cause for eviction is non-payment of rent, as all of you know. And non-payment of rent is a situation courts are used to seeing. They understand the need for a lessor to terminate and evict in a situation where there's non-payment of rent. When you get to other bases for evicting a lessee, it gets a little tougher. I will say insurance is something that we've seen, even though it may not rise to the level as non-payment of rent, it is oftentimes something that courts kind of understand the importance of it, and that this can potentially serve as a basis for termination and eviction. But Ken, you raise a really good point. The lessor, as they are communicating with lessee, they need to create, they need to ensure that they are documenting the reasons why it's important. Now, I don't say they have to or they need to, but if it ends up going to court, and if the lessor has kind of, rather than being very technical and not really elaborating in its communications, if it instead takes the approach that, this is the key requirement. We are not protected unless you provide this evidence of insurance. It's deficient. You need to provide this ASAP, and this causes risks to lessor. However the lessor, it's appropriate to describe it. Then if ultimately it goes to a court and the lessee says, oh, they didn't even tell us about this. We thought we complied. Lessor has that documentation that it was working with the tenant. It showed, it demonstrated in its communications that it was important, and courts are more likely to understand lessor's perspective in that situation. If lessor takes the opposite of approach of being very technical, not very communicative, it leaves open an argument for lessee to say, this is just wrong, this is unfair, and you should not terminate the lease, and you shouldn't evict me, it's not fair. So I'm speaking very generally. Every court, every judge, every jurisdiction may be different, and I'm speaking very generally, but it's important for the lessor to be thoughtful in its communications. A great comment, Ken. Debbie asks, is a declaration page sufficient to prove additional insured status? Really, that endorsement is what lessors should require and should want to see. Jin asks, if the tenant fails to provide evidence of insurance and lessee gets the 3-day notice to quit, how does UD fit in? I think I may have answered that question. The first step in an unlawful detainer action is the notice to cure or quit. In this case, it would be a 3 business day notice period. And if lessee does not comply within that period of time, then that would be the basis for filing an unlawful detainer complaint. This is all UD, unlawful detainer, very technical. Absolutely consult with counsel. The question, isn't this double dip? Lessor and lessee have to pay for insurance to cover the same items. Yeah, that's possible. It is possible. Oh, the fact that, I think I understand. The fact that lessor is paying for a general liability policy, even though lessee has a general liability policy. Yes, this is insurance, 2 separate insurance policies that could potentially cover the same claim. And I understand your point that, is this excessive? It seems unnecessary. And that, I understand that perspective. I would expect, I'm not an insurance broker, of course, but I would expect that the lessor's general liability insurance policy is going to be substantially less expensive than lessee's, because the intent is for it to be kind of a stopgap excess. So I don't, that's what I think is the case. And also there are scenarios where if lessor has multiple properties, they will have, maybe one general liability insurance policy that covers a number of properties. Eric asks, is lessee required to provide a copy or proof of workers' comp insurance and or business interruption insurance? Yes. So those 3 additional coverages we discussed, property damage, business interruption, and workers' comp, lessee is required to provide evidence of that as well. Nick asks, in dealing with an insurance broker, how do you get an endorsement from the insurance company? The insurance broker will typically get that. You may have a copy of your insurance policy if you are a lessee, and that insurance policy should include the endorsement we discussed. but oftentimes it's the insurance broker that provides the certificate and the endorsement attached to the back of it. I think we've gotten to the end of the questions. So wanted to thank all of you for joining. I hope you found it helpful, and we'll continue on with the lease. Expect to do it next month, and we'll continue to go in order, topic by topic. Have a great rest of the day and July, and see you in August.